Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. But today I don't want to talk about a specific book that I read. Rather, because it is the end of the month, I want to do the usual wrap-up and TBR. And what an interesting day it is to do that. A bit of a historical day, as it's one of the few days where a president has, or an ex-president, or just someone political has gotten in trouble. As I'm talking, the former president Donald Trump has been indicted, and I know that's immediately going to date this video, but also making it a TBR and wrap-up is also kind of dating this video. So that's an interesting thing worth talking about. But let's rather talk about books and whatnot. Specifically, in March, I read a little bit less, just because one of the books that I read, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, was a bit lengthy, 1,200 pages, which I have a little bit to say about that. But it took me about 2 weeks to finish it, and so I got less other reading done. I know some people can read multiple books at once, like Lucas over at the Bits of Lit does that from time to time. I just, if I focus on multiple things, I'll get distracted and I'll kind of lose the thread. So I don't really like to focus on more than one book at a time. I'd say it was still a pretty good month for reading, and I also have a lot of interesting things planned for April. So, be on the lookout for whatever comes that way. And so without further ado, let's do the usual wrap-up and TBR. I'll start with the wrap-up, of course, followed by the TBR, and we'll move on from there. So what did I read in March? Well, in terms of books, I read The Way of Kings, of course, by Brandon Sanderson, which I thought was pretty good. I really enjoyed some of Sanderson's writing, particularly how he writes battle scenes, action-y kind of things. He knows how to ratchet up the tension and leaves you hooked. He also writes characters pretty well and builds up the world pretty well, which is something that I've heard other people say. Like even in a recent Wired interview where they kind of criticized Sanderson, they also pointed out he's not very good at writing plot or anything like that, but he does a great job of building up the world and making these characters feel real and fresh and interesting. And I'm especially excited to read the sequel down the road. I'll probably read that for May. I don't want to read it next month because that's 1,200 pages, and that was one of my issues with it. It's so lengthy, and my issue with that is it's 1,200 pages. I only have so much time on this planet, and I don't know if 1,200 pages is going to be a good investment of my time, especially because he spends so much time building up this world. And my question is this going anywhere, or is Brandon Sanderson just meandering? And if a book is 200 pages long, that's not such a big investment of your time. And it's okay to read something bad that's just 200 pages. But again, if it's 1,200 pages, that's pretty lengthy. And not every book needs to be that long. I would say very few books need to be that long. I think there's certain elements of Sanderson's style that he could hone and improve upon, but he's been writing for so long that I don't think he's really capable of change at this point. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, because again, he is a somewhat quality writer. But it does make it hard to get into his work. So I'm gonna keep reading through The Way of Kings, the Stormlight Archives. But I'm kind of on the fence about whether I want to fully continue and invest in the works of Sanderson. I also read Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. I thought it was great, a wonderful graphic novel from an author that I had not encountered before, even if I had watched one of the movies that she had written. I consider it the best of the month. The Way of Kings was pretty good, but Persepolis elicited more emotion in me, and I feel like that's what I'm really looking for when I'm reading. Persepolis is a fascinating story, and there's a lot to talk about in terms of the immigrants' experience and religious fundamentalism and living in those sort of authoritarian societies. So I definitely recommend that you go seek this out if you're looking for a quality graphic novel, as well as an interesting memoir. I also read Child of Dreams by Kia Asamiya, which was a Batman story. It was a manga, the first manga that I've ever read. I thought it was a lot of fun, not too much in depth in terms of themes and whatnot, worth exploring, but I do think it set me on a path where I want to find and read more manga. I also read Red Eye, Black Eye by K. Thor Jensen, which I thought was kind of aimless. It's also unintentionally hilarious because the beginning of the story starts with the character getting fired and getting evicted, and then they also look out their window and they see the World Trade Center towers get hit. And it's always one of those weird sort of accidental kind of humor things where like why would you incorporate that into your story? It's such a traumatic event, and for you to say, "Oh, this was another part of the worst day of my life," it kind of feels like you're centering that about yourself. But most of the rest of the story was just like Thor talking about how he couch surfed and the people that he met. But it didn't really seem to go anywhere, and maybe it was talking about how youth is sometimes aimless. But I think he could have done a better job with handling that theme. So kind of a so-so graphic novel. Then I also read Macbeth by William Shakespeare. I can very much see why it's one of the best, or viewed as like one of the best plays out there, and why we kind of adapt it in different ways so often. I really liked the use of prophecy in the story and Macbeth's slow descent, along with his wife, into madness and paranoia, trying to do everything desperately to survive and hold on to the power that they fought to obtain. It was quite a contrast to maybe like Julius Caesar or the other Shakespeare plays that I read. So yeah, I definitely recommend that you read that if you haven't read it already. And then I also read Still Hood by an author named Quan Foye, which I thought was really strange. It's supposed to be urban fiction, which is, I think, a weird sort of white applied genre name for literature that is about black individuals. And it just feels like a real racist term because, again, urban is so often applied to people of color. And it's sort of about like the nature of the game and life in the hood, and if it felt honest at all, like it'd probably be a really solid book, especially the ending, which I think is pretty good. But mostly it seems to just drift into stereotypes. Like, it's written by a black man, but it seems like it's written about like stereotypes that white people believe. Like, it's black literature for white people and playing up on their stereotypes and trying to get at what they think the hood looks like so that they they'll be entertained. But it just feels really wonky, really sexist, really misogynistic, and I don't know, I maybe that was intentional, but it comes off really insincere at times. And so probably one of the worst books that I've read recently, which is unfortunate. I also read a number of short stories for the month of March, including The Cure by Rahul Mehta, which was forgettable. Not a whole lot worth talking about there. Some interesting ideas while I read it, especially about like burning money and whatnot. But Mehta just seemed to speed through the entire story, so not a whole lot to grasp onto even now. There's also The Hanging Stranger by Philip K. Dick, a pretty good short story. Most of the time, Philip K. Dick is an author worth checking out, so I definitely recommend that you go read that one if you haven't done so already. And I also read Civil Peace by Chinua Achebe. It was about a Nigerian refugees, not a refugee, but a survivor of the Nigerian Civil War, sort of trying to get their life back together and the consequences of the Civil War. A lot worth talking about there. Achebe is in general a pretty solid writer, so that one's worth checking out as well. And then I also read Amour by Nicole Krauss, which I thought was really well written. It was pretty sad as well, sort of exploring a failed romance in the backdrop of refugee camp that exist for unknown reasons. And I just thought that exploring why those relationship ends and changing relationship goals was something that Krauss did particularly well. And then I read a number of Poetry Thursday, or poetry videos for Poetry Thursday, including one by Amy Uematsu, among many other authors. Check out those videos in the Poetry Thursday playlist. If you find anything that you like, feel free to comment and let's have a little bit of a discussion there. But what do I plan to read in April? Well, my TBR includes a number of books, including The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which I was going to read in March, but that the Way of Kings kind of filled up much of the month. So I'm looking forward to reading The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. So be on the lookout for that. As well as Passing by Nella Larson, which I'm actually in the process of reading, and I have quite a bit to say about it already. It's a pretty short book, but it's jam-packed full of a lot of interesting writing and interesting themes and fascinating characters as well. So I think that's probably going to be an early contender for a book of the year, in my opinion. And then I also want to get to the Iliad by Homer. I'm very much interested in reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, and getting that experience of the ancient epics. I believe that Lucas over at the Bits of Lit has already read it, and I know he reacted positively to it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what I gained from it, and just really becoming more knowledgeable about the plays of the past, and seeing how they might have influenced what we're writing in the present. As I said before, I want to get into more manga, so I'm gonna start reading the Berserk series. Berserk is about a guy named Guts with a large sword. As far as I can tell, it was made into an anime, which was short-lived, but I know the manga was pretty popular too. My local library seems to have a lot of mangas, but unfortunately they're like volume 1 is checked out for many of them, so it's hard to get into these series. But I have some friends who've recommended a couple, so hopefully, in addition to the graphic novels that I want to read, I can start reading a few manga here and there. I also want to read Ella Enchanted. As longtime viewers might know, I'm very interested in reading Newbery Medal winners, specifically because a lot of them have been pretty good, in my opinion, including Holes and A Light in the Dark by Christine Soontornvat, which was recommended to me by Lucas over at the Bits of Lit. And I read a couple others that were mixed quality, but I haven't read Ella Enchanted. And I recall seeing the movie, but I want to check out the book and see how that is. I recall seeing it when I was a teenager in high school, but I never bothered to check it out, unfortunately. And then I also want to check out some books from the library that I usually do at random. Might find some real winners, or might find some stinkers, as in the case of last month, where I read Still Hood, which was a random library selection, and it was so-so. And then I also want to read a book club book for the book club that I'm in with my friend Bevan, who doesn't have a BookTube channel yet. It's called Men, Women, and Chainsaws, which is about women and men in the horror industry, maybe a little bit of sexism there or something like that. I'm not fully privy to the details, but I am looking very much forward to checking it out, because horror movies are always interesting to watch and talk about. As for short stories, I have a couple planned for the month of April as well, including one by Rudolph Fischer. That was one of the videos that I think I was going to do in March, but I got mixed up or something like that. And I was also going to plan on it for February, because Rudolph Fischer is a Black author, and I wanted to highlight him for Black History Month. But again, I found a bunch of other Black authors as well, so again, it's spilling out into the year. And then I also want to read a short story by Stuart Edward White, The Girl Who Got Rattled, I think it's called, which was later made into one of the vignettes in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which was a Netflix movie made by the Coen brothers, which I really, really enjoyed. And so I want to talk about one of the short stories from, or that was the basis for one of the vignettes there. So be on the lookout for that. And then I have a number of poems planned. Hopefully I can revisit some classic poets, and I especially have one that is about the Great Irish Famine, and is by like a poet named Lady Jane something or other. But the poem kind of goes hard, so I can't wait to talk about it. And yeah, that's what I have planned for April. Anyway, so that was my wrap up and my TBR. A lot of quality reads that I read in March, and a lot of good things that I have planned for April. I hope it's a real winner of a month. If you have any recommendations that you have for me, or you want to talk about something that I mentioned here, do so in the comments below. It's always good to hear from other people out there and get a lot of recommendations, even though they rack up my TBR and drive me wild sometimes. But yeah, be sure to comment below if you want to say anything like that. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about this channel if they don't already know about it. Or you can even join the Discord and have further conversations with the wonderful people that exist there. But until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and April-y travels. Farewell.